Nathan Reed stumbled into table 7 at Harbor Light Café after Travis Boone shoved him. A paper cup tipped, and dark coffee spread across the wood like a slow stain. A silver pen slid from Nathan's jacket and rolled toward the heel of Audrey Blake, CEO of Blake Hospitality Group, who had just walked in. Travis smirked. "That's where people like you belong, Reed." On the floor, a customer raised a phone, then lowered it. Megan went pale behind the counter. Martha gripped her apron. Nathan did not rise. His eyes were calm enough that the whole room forgot how to breathe. He bent down slowly and picked up the silver pen, the last gift his wife Elena had given him before the cancer took her 3 winters ago. He wiped the barrel against his thumb the way another man might steady a wounded bird, and slid it back into the inside pocket near his heart. He spoke without looking up, almost to himself. A man can fall without becoming low. It was not a comeback. It was the kind of sentence a person learns the hard way, in rooms far worse than this one, and carries with him until it sounds like prayer. Elena had given him the pen the night he passed his journeyman exam, and she had told him, in her plain, steady way, that a man's name was the only thing he owned outright in this country, and he should sign it with something heavy. 6:15 that same morning came back to him in a single quiet flash. He had been kneeling behind the counter then, a small flashlight clenched between his teeth, copper fittings spread on a folded napkin, coaxing one more season of life out of an espresso machine older than the boy who had installed it. Martha Keller had stood above him, with 2 coffees and a worried mouth, her gray hair pinned crooked from another sleepless night. "You should charge me proper, Nathan." He had only smiled around the flashlight. "1 cup of coffee and no lecture, Martha." She had set the mug on the counter and walked away before he could see her eyes. The bill from the bank had come the day before. She had not opened it yet. Megan Porter, 26 and 3 years into a job that should have been a 2-year stop, watched him from the order window, now with the kind of gratitude she did not know how to say out loud. She had once told Martha, late on a Sunday closing shift, "He fixes things nobody pays him to fix." Martha had only nodded, because there were not many words left for men like Nathan Reed in a town that had stopped knowing how to thank them. Megan had moved to Bayport from upstate 4 years ago, after her own father had died and the house had to be sold. She knew the difference between a man who showed up and a man who only said he would. Nathan was the first kind. The town was getting low on the first kind. Audrey Blake paused inside the front door. Rain still beaded on the shoulders of her cream wool coat, and let her eyes do what her eyes had been trained for almost 20 years to do. She measured the water stain on the ceiling, the uneven floorboard near the bakery shelf, the tired register, the worn denim jacket of the man on the floor, and the grease still under his nails. In those first 30 seconds, she filed Nathan Reed into the same column as everything else her regional manager had described in his report. Failing infrastructure, failing tenant base, failing community fabric, a black man on his knees beside an overturned cup, in a place she had come to either buy cheap or bury quietly. That was what Travis had promised her she would see, and for 30 seconds, that was all she allowed herself to see. 15 minutes earlier, Travis Boone had walked into Harbor Light Café, the way some men walk into rooms that do not yet belong to them but soon will. He did not greet anyone. He did not order. He drifted along the counter with the air of an appraiser at an estate sale, tapping his knuckle against the pastry case, glancing into the corners for damp, sniffing once at the air as if cinnamon and burnt espresso were personal offenses against his future. Megan. He did not look at her when he said it. Why does the display look half empty? Megan Porter had been wiping the same square inch of counter for 2 minutes, trying not to be in his line of sight. "We sold through the morning batch, sir. There's another tray proofing in the back. It'll be out in 20. Travis cut her off with the flat of his hand. "Then make it look full. People don't invest in empty. They invest in busy. Find some loaves. Stack them in front. We have a guest coming who decides the next 10 years of this block, and I am not letting her see bare shelves." Megan went to the back without answering, because answering Travis Boone was a thing she had learned not to do in the first month. While she stacked yesterday's loaves into a pyramid she would not be able to sell, Travis drew a line through 3 items on the chalkboard menu without asking. The senior breakfast that Martha had kept at $4 for 9 years was one of them. He moved on before she could come back out, and his loafers stopped beside the espresso machine where Nathan Reed was tightening a copper fitting beneath the steam wand. Travis looked down at him with a smile that was meant to be seen by an audience that had not yet arrived. "Still playing repairman, Reed? I thought Martha had standards." The sentence hung in the air a beat too long. There were 2 edges to it, and Nathan felt both. The first edge was about a wrench in his hand. The second edge was about the color of the hand. Travis had used both edges before, in front of investors, when he had introduced Nathan as the help, and laughed when Nathan did not laugh with him. Nathan set the wrench down on the folded napkin, lined up beside the screws he had already removed. He did not look up. He did not answer. There were words for what Travis was, and Nathan owned all of them. But he had learned a long time ago that some men needed your anger to feel real, and the kindest punishment was refusing to feed them. Megan stood a few feet behind, both hands twisted into the front of her apron. She had heard Travis pull Martha aside in the back office 2 weeks ago and say it quietly, like an instruction, "Keep him in the back when investors come. The optics matter." She had told Nathan that same night by text, sitting in her car in the dark, with her phone pressed to her chest. "He's going to make today ugly. I'm sorry I can't stop him." Nathan had answered with one line, and the line had stayed in her head ever since. "You're not supposed to. That's not your job." Now, watching Travis circle the room as if he owned the carpet, Megan reached one hand into her apron pocket and pressed her thumb against her phone case until the metal warmed. The text was still there. Nathan's answer was still there. And for the first time that morning, she felt the small, stubborn click of a person deciding she was done being smaller than she actually was. Audrey Blake stepped to the window seat and set her cream coat across the back of the chair, with the deliberate care of a woman who had been measuring rooms since she was 23. She took her leather notebook out of her bag and opened it to the inside cover, where, taped flat against the calfskin, was a folded square of construction paper, soft with age. She unfolded it without quite meaning to. She had not meant to look at it today. She had not meant to look at it most days, but the rain on the window had a way of softening certain decisions. The drawing had been done by her niece, Hannah, 8 years ago, when Hannah was 4, and Audrey had been newly promoted, newly divorced, newly unable to come home for Christmas. It showed Audrey in red marker beside a tall office building, holding a clipboard, wearing a crown that had been carefully split down the middle, one half tilted forward, one half tilted back. Underneath, in the wobbling letters of a 4-year-old, were 2 lines. "Aunt Audrey wears a crown, but the crown is broken because she works too much." Audrey had not taken it down in 8 years. She had also not, in 8 years, sat still long enough to ask herself why. Megan came up to the table with a fresh pour, careful not to lean against the cracked brace under the counter on her way past. She set the cup down, and her eyes, by accident, brushed across the open notebook. She did not mean to read it. She read it anyway. "Pretty things can still look lonely, huh?" The words slipped out of her before her training caught them. Her ears went pink instantly. "Sorry, ma'am. My niece said that to me once, about a doll." Audrey lifted her head slowly. The sharp look in her face came first. The look that had ended careers in conference rooms in 3 cities. Then, just as quickly, the sharpness softened, because Megan was already retreating, already apologizing with her shoulders. Audrey did not answer. For a long second, she only looked at the young woman in the apron, and for the first time that morning, something in her chest moved that she had not given permission to move. A door, very small, very old, that had been shut so long she had forgotten there was a room behind it. She thought of Hannah, who was 12 now, who had not asked her to come home in 3 Christmases. Travis was at her elbow in 3 strides. He had been watching from the espresso bar, and the moment Megan had spoken to Audrey directly, he had calculated his interruption like a chess piece. "Don't mind her, Audrey." His smile was sleek. "She gets emotional during inspections. New shift, nervous girl. You know how it is." He laid his fingertips against Audrey's elbow, a touch so light it was almost not a touch, and tried to steer her 3 feet to the left, away from the counter, away from Megan. Audrey did not move. She kept her eyes on Megan, who was already halfway back to the espresso machine, head down, embarrassment burning at the back of her neck. And in that small refusal, Audrey noticed something she had walked past in 3 meetings and 4 flights with Travis Boone. He smiled at her. He frightened everyone else. She closed the notebook quietly, smoothed her thumb once across the calfskin, and turned to face the room, as if she had just arrived in it for the first time. Something in here did not match Travis's report. She did not yet know what, but she was starting, against her own training, to want to know why. It happened over a saucer. It almost always does, in places like Harbor Light, where dignity is balanced on small porcelain rims, and the smallest sound can decide who counts as a person that morning. Megan slid a clean saucer across the counter to set up the next order. The lip caught the chipped corner of the register tray, and the disc rolled. Not broken, not even chipped, simply rolled the way a saucer does, in a slow, lazy half-circle along the wood. Travis was already turned toward her, before it stopped moving. Unbelievable. He said it loud enough to be heard at the window. "Don't apologize to the floor, Megan. Apologize to Miss Blake. She came here to decide whether this place deserves saving, and you're showing her exactly why it doesn't." Megan's face went the color of skim milk. She bent to pick up the saucer, and her hand was shaking enough that her thumb skidded on the rim. 3 customers near the door looked at their cups. One older man folded his newspaper slower than he needed to. They were good people, and they were ashamed, and they did not yet know how to be ashamed out loud. Nathan crossed from the espresso bar in 4 steps that did not look like 4 steps. He did not rush. He did not raise a hand. He did not put himself in front of Megan, which would have made her small. He stopped beside her, shoulder to shoulder, and looked across the counter at Travis with eyes that were not angry, only level. She didn't drop the saucer. "The counter edge is uneven. I told you yesterday when you leaned on it and cracked the brace. It catches anything you slide across it. I was going to shim it tonight." Travis turned his head toward Nathan, and for half a second his eyes did something small and very old. They dropped to Nathan's hand on the counter, traveled along the brown of his forearm to his jaw, and came back up. It was the kind of look a man gives when he is reminding himself who he is talking to. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Audrey, 8 feet away, saw all of it. Careful, read. Nathan picked up the saucer. He wiped it with a clean towel from the rack. He set it down beside the sink. Not in front of Travis. Not in front of Megan. Just in its proper place. The way a man with sense puts a thing back. "Truth doesn't become disrespect," he said, "just because it arrives from someone you look down on." He said it quietly. He did not even look up when he said it, but in a room where everyone had been quiet for the wrong reasons for a long time, a quiet sentence said for the right reasons can carry farther than a shout. Megan exhaled. It was the first full breath she had taken in 20 minutes. She did not say thank you. She did not need to. For the first time in many months, she was standing next to a person who had decided, without being asked, that she did not have to stand alone. Travis closed the distance between himself and Nathan in 2 steps, and the smell of his cologne, expensive and chemical, briefly buried the smell of coffee. "You think this is your moment?" His voice was low now, meant for Nathan's ear and Audrey's. Nathan did not move back. He did not move forward. He said, "No, I think it's hers," and he tipped his chin, the smallest motion, toward Megan, who was straightening up beside him with her hands no longer shaking. Audrey, at the window, raised her cup halfway to her mouth, set it back down without drinking, and did not realize the coffee had gone cold in her hand. Pride and wisdom rarely sit at the same table, and when they do, pride almost always orders first. Travis stepped back from the counter, and his face rearranged itself into something he probably believed was authority. "People like you," he said, loud enough now to be heard by the window, by the door, by Audrey. "People like you always want to play noble, like it's going to change what you are." The phrase floated for a second over the counter, and every adult in Harbor Light Café heard the thing Travis had not quite said and had not quite not said. Then he moved. He stepped forward, and shoved Nathan in the chest with the heel of his palm. Not hard enough to fell a fighter, hard enough to humiliate a working man in front of his boss. Nathan's back hit the edge of table 7. The paper cup tipped. Megan made a small, involuntary sound. The silver pen rolled. Nathan caught the edge of the table with one open hand and stilled himself before anything could fall further. He did not stumble. He did not snap. He rose slowly, one palm flat against the wood, the other open at his side where everyone in the room could see there was nothing in it. "It's all right," he said. It was not for Travis. He looked across at Megan first. "Are you okay?" She nodded, eyes full. He glanced toward Martha, who was clutching the register edge with both hands. "Did any of the coffee reach you?" Martha shook her head, unable to speak. Only after he had checked every person within 10 feet did he glance briefly down at his own sleeve, where the coffee was already cooling against his forearm. Travis read the calm wrong. He read it as an invitation. He moved forward a second time, his hand coming up, and what happened next took less than a heartbeat and would be talked about in Harbor Light for years. Nathan shifted half a step, no more than the width of a floorboard. His left hand met Travis's wrist. It was not a strike. It was not a grab. It was a placement, the way a carpenter sets a level on a beam to see if a thing is true. There was no twist, no pressure, no pain. Nathan simply guided Travis's hand down and away from his own body, the way a parent closes a door before a child sees what is on the other side. He released the wrist as soon as it was no longer pointed at him. "Please don't do that again." Owen Pierce, head of Audrey's personal security, had already moved 2 steps from the door, his weight forward in his shoes. He stopped where he was. Owen had spent 11 years in a profession that taught a man to read the difference between threat and discipline, between rage and restraint. He had seen men trained to intimidate. He had seen men trained to win. He had seen men trained to hurt other men efficiently and without conscience. What he had just watched was none of those. What he had just watched was a man who had clearly been taught, somewhere, at some cost, how to use force, and who had spent the years since learning exactly how not to use it. Audrey leaned an inch toward Owen without taking her eyes off Nathan. "Who is he?" Her voice was barely above the rain on the windows. Owen did not answer for a moment. When he did, his voice was lower than hers. "Not the man they told you he was, ma'am." The cup on table 7 dripped one final drop. The silver pen had come to rest near Audrey's left shoe. She bent down without thinking and picked it up. She felt the weight of it, the worn engraving she could not yet read, and she did not give it back. Not yet. Megan stepped out from behind the counter. She did not look at Travis. She walked straight across the open floor, past the overturned cup, and stopped 4 feet from Audrey, close enough to be heard, not close enough to be intrusive. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was not. "Ma'am, you don't know who you're about to lose." She reached under the counter as she said it, and lifted out a thin manila folder, the kind office supply stores sell 10 to a pack. It was the folder Nathan had handed her a week ago, sliding it across the prep table at closing, his face turned away in that careful way of his. "If it ever gets bad, give this to whoever can stop it." Not before. She had not opened it. She did not need to. But she opened it now, in front of Audrey, because the time he had described had arrived in a way none of them had wanted. The first page was a photograph, taken on a phone, slightly off-center. Mrs. Alden from Maple Street, 82, stood beside her blue sedan in a steady gray rain, her cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders. Nathan was in the foreground, kneeling at the rear tire, lug wrench in one hand, hair beaded with water. "Tire blew on her way home from Sunday service," Megan said quietly. She offered him $40. He said he didn't take grocery money, ma'am. He drove home soaked through. She made him a pound cake the next Tuesday, and he ate 2 slices and said it was the best he'd had since his mother died. The second page was a receipt, stapled to a small handwritten note. $280, paid in cash, at Hendrickson Auto Parts. The note, in Nathan's blocky engineer's hand, read times for Megan. March. Do not tell her. "My car died the week my little brother got admitted for pneumonia," Megan said, and her voice cracked, but she did not stop. I couldn't pay for both. The next morning the car worked. Hendrickson told me a man had come in before the store opened. He wouldn't say who. I figured it out. Nathan never did. The third page was a list, in the same blocky hand. 8 names, 8 addresses. Beside each, a short note. F. Furnace pilot relit. No charge. Porch rail rebuilt. Materials only. Breaker box rewired. No charge. Water heater drain. No charge. Chapter 18 Households. In 6 months, after his own shifts ended, 2 of the addresses were across the river, in the part of town where the streetlights had been out since June. Travis's voice cut across her. Anyone can fake a folder. He said it loud, and it landed wrong, because the room had already stopped listening to him. Megan turned the last page slowly. It was a photocopy. Smudged in one corner, A. Associate of Applied Science, Industrial Electrical Engineering, awarded to Nathan T. Reed, with distinction, summer term. 2 years ago, she set the folder down on the table beside Audrey's cup. He's been studying at the community college at night for 3 years, ma'am. He never told Martha. He never told me. I found a tuition receipt under the espresso machine last winter, and I asked him. He said grief isn't an excuse to stop growing. That was the whole sentence. Audrey looked at the folder. Then she looked across the room at Nathan, who was standing very still beside table 7, the way a man stands when something private has been spoken about him in public and he has not been asked. The worn denim jacket she had filed under Time's failing tenant times an hour ago looked different now. It was not the costume of a man who had given up. It was the working coat of a man who had been carrying this whole block on his back, without asking to be thanked, for a long time. Nathan said nothing. He did not look at the folder. He looked, instead, at the espresso machine behind the counter, which was still hissing tired. Uneven breaths, the way it had hissed all morning. He crossed to it now. The customers turned their heads as he passed, the way a room turns when a person who has not spoken for a long time finally walks toward a thing he has been waiting to say. He knelt at the side panel and folded it back. The 4 small screws were already lined up on a clean, folded napkin from earlier that morning, set out the way a surgeon lays instruments before he opens. Inside the machine, the main black power lead ran from the relay to the heating element, and exactly 6 inches into its insulation jacket, there was a cut, not a fray, not a rodent chew, not a worn split from age and steam. A single, deliberate, clean diagonal slice through both the outer jacket and the inner conductor. The kind of cut a person makes with snips when they want a thing to fail later in the day, but not now. The copper underneath was bright, untouched by oxide, hours old, at most. Nathan had photographed it before he closed the panel back up. Time-stamped, 3 angles. He had a habit, he had told Megan once, of treating every problem in this town like a problem that might one day need to be proven to a stranger. Megan came around the counter and pressed a hand against her mouth. That's why it kept shorting out. That's why I had to flip the breaker twice this week. Martha began to cry without sound. 2 thin streaks down a face that had spent 29 years not crying in front of customers. She had been blaming the wiring on age. She had been blaming herself. Nathan reached into the inside pocket of his denim jacket, near the silver pen Audrey was still holding, and withdrew a small SD card sealed inside a clear plastic sleeve. He held it out, flat, on his open palm. He did not raise his voice. The wiring looked wrong when I opened her up at 6:30 this morning. The cut was too clean, so I went and pulled the card from the service camera Martha's nephew installed above the bakery shelf last winter after the break-in. She forgot it was there. The unit isn't networked anymore, but it still records to the card locally on a 48-hour loop. The footage stamp will match the cut. Martha blinked through tears. The one Kyle put up after the storm. Nathan nodded once. It was still running, Martha. Travis laughed, but it came out thin and high. He's a handyman pretending to be an investigator. You're going to take security footage from him? Owen Pierce stepped past Travis without looking at him and put out one steady hand toward the card. Then you won't mind if we watch it. One of Audrey's two assistants took the card with the careful hands of a person who understood what chain of custody meant, slipped it into a tablet adapter, and a moment later mirrored the playback to the small flat screen above the counter, the one Martha used to announce the day's soup. The room turned, slowly, all at once. Every cup in Harborlight Café stopped halfway to a mouth, and the only sound for the next 10 seconds was the rain against the window and the tired breath of a machine that had been sabotaged by the man who said he was here to save it. The footage opened on an empty cafe in cold blue pre-dawn light. The wall clock above the bakery shelf read 5:41. The front door, locked from the inside, was still. Then a key turned in the back service lock. A man entered from the kitchen, glanced once over his shoulder out of habit, and crossed to the espresso machine with the comfort of a person who had done this before. He set a small leather pouch on the counter, unrolled it, took out a pair of insulated wire snips. He pulled the side panel of the machine with the practiced hand of someone who had studied the schematic. The camera angle caught his face clearly when he stood up. It was Travis Boone. He was already holding his phone to his ear. The audio came through the speaker, thin, but unmistakable. Yeah, it's done. Wires clipped right at the relay. She'll spend the whole morning watching them try to run a cafe off a broken machine and empty pastry case. A pause, a laugh, relax. By tonight, Blake'll see a failing cafe full of desperate people. We scare them low enough. They sell low enough. Don't worry, I'll clean out the whole block by the end of the quarter. Audrey wants numbers, not sob stories from some black handyman playing hero behind a coffee bar. Megan's hand left her apron and covered her mouth. Martha sat down hard on the stool behind the register. The older man with the newspaper at the window let the paper fall from his lap onto the tile, and he did not pick it up. Audrey did not move. Her face did not move. But something behind her eyes, something that had not been still for a very long time, locked into place. Travis took a step backward as if distance from the screen could undo the audio. Audrey. His voice cracked on the second syllable. That's taken out of context. You don't run a deal this size without language like that sometimes. You know how the room talks. You know how Nathan turned toward him for the first time since the shove. There was no heat in his voice. There was no triumph. There was, instead, the awful patient steadiness of a man who had heard sentences like that one too many times to be surprised by another. The whole thing is context. He listed them then. He did not raise his voice. He did not shake. He named the afternoon Travis had introduced him to the Charleston investors as Times the Help. He named the morning Travis had told Martha that Times hiring local color makes the place look unprofessional. He named the night, 2 weeks ago, when Megan had heard Travis through the office wall, instructing her to Times keep him in the back when investors come. Megan was nodding before he was finished, tears falling without sound. It's true, she said. He did say that. I wrote down the date. Nathan looked at her gently. You wrote it down? She nodded. You taught me to. The older man at the window, Frank Halloran, 68, retired postal carrier, 11 years a Harborlight regular, folded his newspaper finally and stood up. He looked at the floor, as men of his generation often do when they are about to say a thing they should have said a long time ago. I've been coming here 11 years. I heard him say it twice and told myself it wasn't my place. There's no third time. I'm sorry, Nathan. He sat back down, his hand shaking on the table. 2 seats over, and a nurse in a blue scrub top set her spoon down. I heard him use a word in the parking lot 2 months ago, when Nathan was changing my flat tire. I didn't tell anyone because I thought it would embarrass him. I'm done embarrassing him with my silence. A young father in a maintenance uniform near the back stood up too. He helped me hang a storm door in February. He wouldn't take the 20 I had on me. Said pay it forward. The room was remembering small wounds and small kindnesses it had spent months pretending not to notice. Audrey turned to Travis. I trusted your reports. I let you speak for me in rooms I wasn't in. Her voice did not rise. It got quieter. Don't call this urgency. This was sabotage. And what you said about him on that phone call wasn't business. That was who you are when you think no one is listening. She turned to the assistant with the tablet. Call legal. Preserve the footage and the original card. Call HR. Call the police. Property damage, coercion, and a civil rights complaint. Today, Travis went the color of paper. Owen Pierce stepped to one side, not touching him, simply standing where consequence needs a witness, the way Owen always stood. Audrey crossed the floor slowly, and the expensive confidence she had walked in with an hour ago was gone from her shoulders. What was left was quieter, and because it was quieter, it was true. She stopped 3 feet from Nathan Reed. She did not extend a hand yet. She held out instead the silver fountain pen she had picked up off the floor. Mr. Reed. She said the name, the way a person says a name she has just learned to respect. He blinked at the formality. Ma'am. He took the pen carefully and slid it back into his inside pocket, against his heart, where Elena had always told him to keep the things that mattered. I came here, Audrey said, to measure property. I forgot to measure people. Nobody moved. She turned to Martha, who was still sitting on the stool behind the register, her hands gripped tight in her own lap. Mrs. Keller, Blake Hospitality will not be buying this cafe to replace it. With your permission, we will cover the repairs Travis cost you. We will replace the wiring he sabotaged. We will refit the kitchen properly. We will help refinance the building in your name, on terms a person can actually live with. The sign stays. The staff stays. Your ownership stays. The block is not for sale by us anymore. Megan sat down on the step stool behind the counter and cried without sound, her hands pressed flat against her knees. Martha could not speak. She reached one trembling hand sideways until her fingers closed around Megan's wrist, the way a woman holds another woman's arm when she needs proof that a moment is real. Audrey turned to Megan next. And you won't apologize for a saucer again when a man breaks the table beneath it. That isn't your fault. That has never been your fault. I should have looked harder at the reports that came across my desk with your name on them, as a line item rather than a person. She turned, finally, back to Nathan. She had spoken to executives, senators, foreign ministers, and every word out of her mouth for 20 years had been a word she had rehearsed. For the first time in a very long career, she did not know how to start a sentence. She stood there in front of him, in the cooling smell of coffee and rain, and the silence stretched until even she was aware of it. She thought of her niece. She thought of the crown split down the middle. She thought of how many rooms she had walked into in the last 8 years, and measured for everything except the human cost. She thought, with a sting that surprised her, of how many men who looked like Nathan she had walked past on her way to those rooms, and how easily she had let other people's reports do her seeing for her. I'd like to talk, she said at last. When you're ready. Not today. Nathan nodded once. He did not smile. He did not need to. Owen stepped to Travis's shoulder, said 2 quiet words, and walked him toward the door to wait for the officers who were already turning off Bay Street. Nobody clapped. That was what made the moment what it was. It was not the silence of fear. The way the room had been silent an hour ago. It was the silence of a room learning how heavy an apology can be when it is finally spoken by someone with enough power to make it cost something. 1 month later, Harbor Light Café opened before dawn the way it always had, but the light inside was warmer. The breaker panel was new. The wiring behind the espresso machine was new. The machine itself no longer coughed like an old man in winter. It hummed. The faded blue sign above the door still swung in the wind off the bay, because Audrey Blake had kept her word. Martha Keller still owned the place. Megan Porter ran the morning shift now, standing a little taller each day, and the new young hire watched her the way Megan had once watched Nathan, learning how to stand up straight. Audrey came every Friday at 7:30, alone. No assistants, no contract folder. She sat at the corner table by the window and drank from a chipped white mug. And she listened. She listened the way other people learn a second language, slowly, with embarrassment, and then with relief. Nathan had accepted one consulting offer, but only after rewriting half of it by hand, on the back of Martha's order pad. He had set conditions in his own blocky engineer's print. No property under his review would be used as a marketing symbol without the written consent of its occupants. You negotiate like a man who has nothing to lose. Audrey had said, signing the bottom. Nathan had shaken his head, looking past her at the bay. No, ma'am. I negotiate like a man who knows exactly what he has to protect. Saturday evening, in a small wood frame house on the quiet side of Linden Street, Nathan's 6-year-old daughter, Naomi, sat in the middle of the living room rug, surrounded by a city of plastic blocks. She was building a tiny cafe, humming a song she had made up, the way 6-year-olds do when they are exactly where they want to be. On the shelf above her, in a simple wooden frame, was her newest drawing. Her daddy stood in the rain outside a cafe with the sign Harbor Light arched above him, one hand open, palm up, keeping the light safe for the people inside. Underneath, in careful purple crayon, "My daddy keeps the light." Naomi looked up from her blocks. "Daddy, sit." He sat. She handed him a yellow rectangle, gravely, the way one engineer hands a part to another. "You're the counter." He held it carefully and asked her what came next, and she told him, with absolute seriousness, that next came the sign. The next Friday, Audrey came in early, before the morning crowd. While Martha was still flipping chairs down off the tables, she set her leather notebook on the counter in front of Nathan and opened it to the inside cover. The crown was still split down the middle in 8-year-old red marker. "I think I'd like to stop carrying this alone." Nathan looked down, then up at her. He simply nodded. Once, the small, steady nod of a grown man learning, very late and very carefully, how to trust someone again without needing